Hello and welcome to another Head2Head, and good morning, Keith Sutherland.
Good morning, Dennis.
Keith, lots happening, and locally I see Lisa Chesters has picked up a Guernsey in the Shadow Ministry.
Yeah, it's terrific for Bendigo and for her to be assisting the Shadow Minister for Workplace Relations and Rural and Regional Development. So that's good, and it's a good fit for her because she loves both of those areas. And I think that's good for Bendigo's future, hopefully having a potential minister at some stage if the Labor Party get back in the next election or some time in the future.
Well, good luck to the Minister, because Lisa is a bull terrier when it comes to following down issues, so she will keep the Minister on his toes, there's no question about that. She'll give it 110%. So,
no,
yeah,
3 years in Parliament, and she's done a lot, and she's worked very hard in Bendigo electorate and outside of Bendigo, so yeah, good on her.
Yeah. Worldwide, Keith, here we are again coming off the back of the Nice attacks. It just goes, every day you seem to turn on the TV news, there's another report coming in of an atrocity somewhere in the world. It's almost out of control.
Well, it is out of control. You saw Orlando, Nice, Kabul, and these are, Kabul unfortunately doesn't get much of a mention, but there was 80 odd people. Last night, a priest gets his throat cut, another person gets his throat cut, and then in Japan yesterday where 20 odd people were stabbed to death. What's going wrong? I don't know. And then you relate it back to tourism, and there was actually an article on particularly what's going on with Turkey as well. We were there 12 months ago, as you know, and then I saw the spice market on television a couple of nights ago. No one there. When I was there, it was absolutely packed out. So it's got to be having an enormous effect on people travelling.
Well, it's interesting you say effect on tourism, and I take your point, and no doubt that would be the case. As evidenced, with the images you've seen of an empty market or whatever. I look at it another way though, in a much more worrying way for me. I look at it and I see, and we've actually talked about this socially, I look at it and I think of the young, the people, like you and I grew up in a day and age when there was lots of exciting things happening, and the news was the news, yeah, sure enough, but nothing like it is today. And I mean, I sat there the other night, and I rarely watch the news the way, it's generally online, but I happened to sit down and watch the National News Service, and the first 5 stories all related to tragedy. And my reflection is for the young people, the younger generation, they're being bombarded with this. They're big on social media, so they're getting, if I'm getting it on social media, they are too on their news feed. But you have to look at it and say, in a psychological sense, what sort of an impact does it have on young people who are looking for hope to be bombarded with this every day and every night on a 24-hour cycle? It's unbelievable.
Well, they're sensitised to the whole thing, and back in our day, because we're a little bit older, what was the worst thing that was happening back then was the IRA. That was the first time we heard of bombings and things like that and atrocities. But then these days that people are, every day, you're right, there's another thing, and over the last 2 weeks it's just been horrendous, and then even young kids going to an Orlando sort of disco and parents picking them up and they're shooting them, killing them. So, the world has gone crazy, and
well, I'd like to think
it's copycat, I think, in a lot of cases, unfortunately.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the media has a job to do, and I know that they love to hang their hat on anything sensational that comes in. But at the same time, I'd love to think that there might be an acknowledgement by society that there is a duty of care and responsibility to younger people to not just navel gaze with all the negativity in the world, and to make a really concerted effort, because for every idiot, I was going to say something else, that thinks they're doing something courageous in a terrorist sense and a cowardly attack, and that gathers headlines, there are how many million people doing wonderful things every day. And the news, we're not covering them. We're not doing stories on somebody who's worked helping the homeless last night in Melbourne on a freezing cold night. There are heartwarming stories every day, every minute of every day, but it's the morons who, the bad news, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and simple as that.
And the problem is that we've given them all this publicity to them, as you said, the first 5 news stories basically on murder and mayhem, and I guess if you could perhaps do away with it, but the trouble is we can't now because we have social media, comes through on the news feed all the time, so that's what you see, so you can't stop that sort of news provider.
I'd go a step further. I'd even like to see, and I don't know whether it would work, but I'd love to see a news service where, all right, it's happened, so give it 10 seconds and then move on to what really matters in the world. The loss of life, people deal with that on a local level, but I come back to the psychology or psychological effect that dwelling on so many negative acts by such a tiny proportion of people has on the overall mood of society. And particularly in a day and age, youth suicide and things like that are such big issues these days. And a sense of hope needs to be engendered in those young people. We owe them that much, rather than giving so much time and energy to really a handful, you count on one hand almost, the number of people who are getting probably, 75% of the news coverage.
That's the problem. But unfortunately, then you take it to the other, where you said that psychological problem. We had the Q&A program and Four Corners following that, Four Corners before it, about the atrocities in the jail up in the detention centre up in Northern Territory. So there's some issues there that really need to come to the fore, and having a Royal Commission just for the Northern Territory, I don't think it's a way to go, because we talk about all the things that happen in that, and that footage was just graphic and disgusting.
It was shocking, horrific footage. At the same time, not one bit surprising to me that that's gone on. I hate to admit that, I'm not one bit surprised. But at the same time, I was surprised to hear that 1% of the Northern Territory population are in jail or incarcerated at any one time. 1% of the whole population is in jail. And I know that the Indigenous population is overrepresented in the statistics. But interestingly for me, you talk about a Royal Commission, and I think, I'm trying to think who it was now made the comment, but I thought it was a very relevant comment, that it's pointless having a Royal Commission that can make recommendations and discover
nothing really gets done. It's deferring, putting it off for a period of time. We wait another 2 or 3 years for the results to come through. It's probably, I don't know what else you can do, but the thing is that I guess Malcolm Turnbull's jumped in very quickly, and full marks to him for having said so. But the thing is, I guess they want it off the agenda because next month there is an election in Northern Territory. So, okay, let's call the Royal Commission. The right thing to do, probably. But you're right. We had the commission into black deaths in custody 25 years ago or whatever it was, and there's still 355 black people committed suicide since that time in custody. So I don't know. I don't know how you change the focus, how you change people's attitudes. But yeah, that was a horrendous story the other night. But as you said, let's try and focus a bit more on positive stories.
Interesting on that, the Four Corners program this week too, with the custody issue. It's interesting that Four Corners earlier in the year had a program on the amount of waste and mismanagement, and it's been discovered within the management of Indigenous affairs in Australia. And I mean, I remember, I can quote now, Warren Mundine came out at the time and said, "I'm not surprised by the investigations," and calls for an independent regulator to be replaced with an Indigenous commissioner. I think it's that big. It's no good having just a Royal Commission onto this one aspect.
I agree. It's got to be a broader thing.
It's got to be big, and it's got to have teeth, and it needs to really drill down and say, well, it's pointless throwing more hundreds of millions of dollars at areas meant to help that are obviously fraught with problems. And that Four Corners, the program itself, revealed that again earlier in the year, and we talked about it on this program at the time.
Really interesting you say that too, about talking about waste. It was great that the Productivity Commission came out yesterday and said the waste that is going into building those 12 submarines in South Australia is the most expensive pork barrelling. They didn't say the word pork barrelling, I'm saying it, to try and keep Christopher Pyne in his seat is just disgusting. And the amount of money that we are going to waste, we could have kept the car industry, we could have kept textile industry, we could have kept many industries for $50 billion that's going to go into building 12 submarines that maybe in 30 years' time we won't even have submarines, are totally obsolete. So probably what a crazy waste of money.
You'll have a party of the day then probably prepared to throw another $50 billion at a museum to put the 50 submarines in so everyone can see how it was.
Because they probably can't float anymore.
That's right.
Yeah, crazy.
Another thing, Keith, locally, the Smart Cities Initiative, and Brenton Johnston has put his hand up for council. We've had him, or you've had him in here before. What a great initiative that would seem to be, on face value anyway, a long way to go, but on face value, seems to me to be a great idea.
I thought Brenton really covered it so well, because we see the topic smart city and then we don't understand the consequences, but Brenton, through the Pointy End program, really explained how it all comes together. Great initiative from council, Trevor Budge involved from council, and they're applying to federal government to be the first regional inland city to have this smart city. So yeah, I think there's a flow on with the university, as long as people don't fall through the cracks in the process. But I think it's a great thing for Bendigo, and why shouldn't we be on the map as a smart city? Because we've got all the people, the brains, and we've got education facilities in Bendigo. So it's a great place to start.
Absolutely, and it's well worth catching that interview you've recorded with Brenton, where he goes, and I think you said afterwards, Keith, if I recall correctly, it's refreshing to have somebody like Brenton, who has obviously a really deep understanding of IT, able to explain in layman's terms how some of these things might work, because so often the boffins and the IT gurus, the nerdy types, can speak in such a language that is way over the average punter's head, and we haven't got a clue what the hell they're talking about. But the way, and the example he gave of council, the savings potentially there, by doing things smarter in an IT sense, unbelievable, but a really clear and easy to understand explanation that Brenton was able to offer. So yeah,
full marks to Brenton, I think, and the Bendigo Council has got a great future if people like him can be elected to the Eppalock Ward, because we need some new blood, we need some great young thinkers, and he's one that I certainly put up on a pedestal.
Last point, Keith, Good Friday football's reared its head again with the AFL. Where do you sit on that one? I know you're an avid Carlton supporter. Where do you sit on that one?
No, I must say I'm a very avid St Kilda supporter. Been down there the last two Saturday nights, and I'll probably be down there this Saturday night to watch Brent Harvey.
Well, they're on a bit of a roll too.
They are on a roll, and they've played very well. Felt sorry for the Bullies that we beat by 15 points or thereabouts. But anyway, I don't have a problem with Good Friday, because everything... We used to play no sport on Sunday. Now we play sport on Sunday. That's supposed to be the day to go to church, etc., and rest. Everything else has changed in the world. So I think sport, and it will come, that there'll be football on Good Friday.
Don't you feel though, Keith, and I know you go to the footy as we do occasionally down there in Melbourne, don't you feel though on a Good Friday, sorry for all the people who are going to be dragged into work, whether they're ground staff or attendants outside the ground or on the ticketing thing or inside security? For me, I know we live in a capitalist society, but it seems to me the greed factor is so great that, look, if they could make 25 hours, every day go 25 hours, and don't laugh, that'll probably be the next thing that'll bloody happen. It'll be a roll on from daylight saving, we'll add another hour.
Well, Sweden's down to 30 hours a week, so there you go.
Well, just to make more, create more time to make more money. And I see it as greedy and unnecessary, and I just don't see why they can't leave one thing, one day, to say, well, no one has to work that day. It is, well, not no one, I suppose other places do.
Well, you could say the same about Christmas Day. Everything has changed. We live in a changing world, and I don't know if there is one sacred day. The point is it about money or is it about convenience? I don't know what it's about, but I think it's providing an extra service for those people that perhaps don't belong to church and go along. So,
Well, perhaps I start looking at the AFL as a benevolent society then, trying to offer something a little extra rather than being greedy. Maybe I've got it wrong.
Yeah, I think you might have it wrong, but the AFL love their money, as we all do.
I take your point, though. There's a lot of change. My point, though, is that not all change has been good. All right, Keith, great to catch up again for another week, and we'll look forward to touching base again next week to see what's got the world talking next week. Thank you for joining us again today, and we'll see you next week too.